Welcome people to Kerbal Space Program and a tutorial that's aimed at beginners to help them get to orbit using a stock rocket that we'll build in the VAB. Hopefully you'll be able to learn a few tips along the way, as well as some of the names and meanings of words that we use in Kerbal Space Program. Right, to start with, we're going to need a capsule to put our Kerbal in to get him to orbit. Let's have a look. We've got the Mark 1, or no, that's a bit heavy. Yeah, we'll go for the Mark 1. Single man capsule that's more than adequate for our purposes. Now obviously we're going to need to bring our Kerbal back safely, so we'll put a parachute on, and we need to think about bringing this thing back through the atmosphere when we re-enter, so we'll put a heat shield on the bottom. Yeah, that should do. We've got the means to bring it back. Okay, now we need the means to actually get him into orbit. So below the capsule we'll put a decoupler. Make sure you pick the right size. A small fuel tank. We don't need an awful lot to get this thing the final way into orbit. And let's put an engine on the bottom of that. A little Terrier will do. So this is going to be the actual vehicle that gets to orbit. Now it doesn't have enough fuel or enough power in that little engine to do that all the way from launch, so we're going to need to use a lifting stage. So we'll add another little decoupler underneath this engine, and we'll start adding a few more fuel tanks. Yeah, the 800 will do. And to repeat that, we'll just left alt click. Saves us keep going back to the menu. There we go. And if we left shift and click on the bottom tank, we can just lift this slightly to give us enough room to add an engine to the bottom. Yeah, so engine, what are we going to use for the engine? The swivel, I don't think has enough power to lift this one. Yeah, we'll use this one, which has enough power, but the problem with this particular engine is the nozzle doesn't gimbal, which means we can't steer the rocket using the thrust of the engine. We actually move the nozzle. That's what gimbaling does. It moves the nozzle to allow you to steer. So to help us steer, certainly while we're in the atmosphere, because these won't work in space, we'll add some fins using the symmetry button to make sure we put 4 of them on. And finally we'll put on 4 clamps so it doesn't fall over on the pad. Now we need to adjust our staging there to ensure that when we stage this thing to launch, the clamps release at the same time that the engine fires. Because Kerbal has a nasty habit of putting the stage in so that the clamps release first and then the rocket fires by, which time it's too late because the rocket's already dropped to the surface and gone bang. Anyway, staging sorted. Let's go to the pad. Now as long as we haven't rotated the capsule during construction, that little bit there, as long as we haven't rotated that, then our north line on the nav ball should be pointing to the bottom. Now to launch into orbit we need to head to the east, which is this direction, and to do that the default key will be the D button on your keypad. So we turn on SAS there using T, which is the default key, and we'll throttle up to 100%, which is the Z or Z key on your pad. Space is our staging key, which, because we had our staging sorted out correctly, release the clamps and fire the engine at the same time. You can fire the engine first and then release the clamps using 2 stages. Just make sure you don't release the clamps first and then stage the engine. Right, we'll pause here because getting to orbit doesn't involve just going straight up. We need to be going sideways quite fast. Now there's 2 problems here. If we go straight up for any length of time, it means we're always fighting gravity, which is inefficient. But if we turn to go sideways too soon, that's also inefficient because we're going through the thicker part of the atmosphere for longer, which creates obviously more drag and uses up more fuel. So what we're looking to do is get to where the 90 is on the nav ball heading east. That will be a 45-degree turn, and we're looking to be there at about 10,000 meters. So we'll keep going straight up for the first part of the launch, but when we get to about 1,000 meters, we'll start gently dabbing that D key, which is the default key to head to the east, and we'll just dab that and monitor it. Keep monitoring our height and the rate that we're turning. And as I say, we're hoping to get the little marker there onto the 90 numbers, which is 45 degrees on the nav ball heading to the east by the time we get to 10,000 meters. Doesn't really matter if you're not quite spot on. We certainly don't want to be below 45 degrees, i.e. less than 45 degrees, which is closer to the brown segment of the nav ball, too soon, because that will waste fuel and make it more difficult. But conversely, we don't want to be heading straight up too much by the time we get to 10,000 meters, because that means we'll be going a lot higher than we actually really need to. So there we are, we're at 11,000 meters now, 45 degrees on the nav ball, and then pressing the M key for default for the map view. What we can have a look at is the apoapsis. Now we'll pause there just to explain what apoapsis is. This is our highest point of our current flight. There it is, it's marked by a little AP marker, apoapsis marker. And at this stage of the flight, we're looking to push that figure, our apoapsis, to above 70,000 meters. In Kerbal Space Program, 70,000 meters marks the start of space, which means we're out of the atmosphere. So I just right click on that AP marker so we get a constant readout. And for this tutorial we're going to be going to about 100,000 meters for our apoapsis, which is a safe margin above the atmosphere. And we're keeping eyes on the numbers, and when that reaches 100,000 we're going to press the X key, which is another default key which will kill our engines, set them to 0 throttle. So just keeping an eye on it. There we go. Around about 100,000 meters, give or take. Hit the X key, and now we're coasting. Obviously we're going fairly fast because the atmosphere has heated up the rocket, but not to the point where it goes pop, so we're safe there. So what we need to do now is coast up towards our apoapsis, and by the time we get to within about 20 seconds of the apoapsis, we're going to be looking to be facing pretty much horizontal, parallel to the surface of the planet. So that's where the blue part of the nav ball meets the brown part of the nav ball. So we'll be looking to face pretty much horizontal about 20 seconds before we reach apoapsis. And then we're going to fire our main engines again. And whilst this stage doesn't have enough fuel to get us into orbit, we do have enough in that first tank that we added to the rocket to complete our journey to put us into an orbit around Kerbin. So here we are, we're tilting over till we're facing horizontal. That's the split between the blue bit and the brown bit on the nav ball. Fire up our engine. That's now run out of fuel, so we'll stage to get rid of that one. Stage again to fire the second engine. And what we need to do now is switch back to the map mode, and we're looking for a periapsis, PE marker. There it is on the far side. And now that's rotating round, it means our apoapsis and our periapsis will be around about the same when they start changing position like that. And there we are in orbit. Just to explain what periapsis is, that's our lowest point of our flight. So that would be the part of our flight that's closest to the planet. So apoapsis is the highest point, periapsis is the lowest point, and to be successfully in orbit, both of those need to be, for Kerbin, above 70,000 meters. So here we are, our little vehicle, happily in orbit. Now other words you'll come up against is retrograde and prograde. That on the nav ball there is the retrograde marker, and what that means is, although we're still flying in the same direction, we're actually facing where we've just come from. That's facing retrograde. Retrograde basically means you're facing backwards. And in space flight, you'll need to face retrograde if you ever want to slow down. We'll face prograde to speed up. We'll face retrograde to slow down. So here we go, we can press the little button on our navigation markers there to face prograde. Now if we were to light our engines now, we would actually extend our orbit and make it a lot bigger. But for this tutorial we're just staying in this simple orbit, and we'll be returning to Kerbal. And the easiest way to do that is to slow down so that we fall below orbital velocity. A lot of people think it's to get out of orbit, you just face straight towards the planet and burn. Yeah, you can do that, but it's not the most efficient. So we'll just time warp forward slightly, because for this tutorial we want to land on the daylit side of the planet so we can see what we're doing. So we'll just warp around a little bit. You should also note that any changes you make to your orbit, whichever point of the orbit you make your burn, will affect the opposite side of the orbit that you're on. So by burning retrograde to come back to the planet at this point, we'll actually be lowering the orbital path 180 degrees away from us, i.e. in the opposite side of the planet. As you can see, the periapsis is coming down, and we've got to the point now where our orbital path actually dissects the planet's surface, and we're looking to come back hopefully close to Kerbal Space Center. We'll leave the burn at that point, which is overshooting slightly because the planet's going to rotate below us, which will put the Space Center closer to where we think we're going to be landing. But also we'll slow down considerably as we come back down through the atmosphere, which is going to drop us short of that final intersect point. So now we've just jettisoned the fuel tank and the engine because we're confident that we've got our path set so that we're going to come back to the surface. And at this point all we need to do is make sure that we're facing retrograde, so we're facing backwards, which will present the heat shield on our little capsule here towards the atmosphere to stop us burning up as we come back through. Now again, we've got we're back in the atmosphere now, we're below 70,000 meters. Another way of telling that is if you've got your music settings so that the music plays whilst you're playing Kerbal Space Program, the music actually stops when you come back into the atmosphere. So we've speeded this up a little bit to try and keep the tutorial as short as possible. Got nice and toasty. The heat shield's doing its job. Bangs in the background there were probably the fuel tank and engine exploding as that came back through the atmosphere. All we need to do now is get ready to deploy the chutes, making sure that the chute marker is showing us white, which means it is actually safe to deploy the chutes. And there they go. And then we'll just fast forward this till we get down to around about 1,000 meters, which is the point where the parachutes fully deploy. There we go. And again, to save a little bit of time, we'll just fast forward slightly till we're close to the ground. And we'll slow down just before touchdown. There we are, safely back again. One Kerbal, a quick orbit, and safely returned. Let's recover the vehicle. Well, I hope that was of use. We've shown you a rocket that can get to orbit, hopefully giving you some basic pointers on how to actually fly the rocket to achieve orbit, and I suppose more importantly, how to return from orbit once you've managed to reach that point. Thanks for watching.